All right, I'm going to quickly cover what we call kind of dynamic card filters. This was introduced with our version 4.2 and basically allows for a way to define these filters on either your list of status records or your list of search results that can be dynamic or built based off of the actual data that you get returned. So first of all, let me show you an example. We'll go to the My Request section here. And the filter by type kind of wired into the card viewer, but the filter by status is what we consider to be a dynamic card filter. And basically what it's doing is using the data that we get returned, what are the different status values we have, and then building the list of choices or selections that I can have to filter this record. So I can go say to the new, I can check this, check them all to see all of them, or I can do the show all, which is just going to basically not apply a filter, but just leave it as kind of open. A couple of things, so let me show kind of behind the curtains here how this is set up. So if I go to the card object records, I go to filters, you'll find a status filter here. And this one has this dynamic list checkbox. So if I don't have a dynamic list, it's going to be build the list of selection values you have. But by doing dynamic list, I have a couple other fields or options that are displayed here as well. One is what's the attribute, which I'll highlight in a second what this represents. Show open means whether it's going to be opened or collapsed. So in this case, it was an already opened list versus being collapsed. I'll show you an example in a minute where it's collapsed. And then the checkbox equal to true additional attributes. And we might extend the additional attributes to have additional functionality or features. But really what this is there's really just one or two, or one option either on or off, whether you want to display this as checkbox or not as switches. So if I take this off, for example, and I save this, and I refresh this list, what you'll find is the display behavior of this is more of a switch. So and these kind of still work the same way, where I can filter this just to show the new or show the new and the open together, turn these off, but you see there's no like show all kind of selection or checkbox. So by default, all these kind of filters are kind of set up with this checkbox is equal to true, so there's a consistent experience on those filters. So back to the attribute of status. So this is defined, in this case I had, or if I go back, you'll see I have defining two different card types that this filter applies to, both my incidents and my requests that show up in my status page. So this means that I need to have this attribute available to both of those kind of types. And so that means when I go to the card objects, if I look at my request item records, I need to have an attribute down here called status to build and populate that list. Same thing will exist here on the incidents in terms of how, what's this status value, where does it come from those source records. So in this case, to have a dynamic filter that goes across multiple types, I do need to make sure I've got that attribute in each of these different areas. All right, so let me show you another example. So we'll go to, we'll do a search. Now here's the case here where I do a search for email. Based off my search results, it's going to go out and build three different dynamic filters, one for the different knowledge bases that I got back, the different catalogs from the category records or the catalog records that I got, and then the categories, which actually goes across both knowledge and catalog records in this case. So you can see I can filter for the email category or the email category. These can be in different places. I do have other categories in here that are like my top requests, right, which is a catalog category all in one list. Now these work a little differently in that these particular filters, a lot of these, as you might know behind the scenes, like the knowledge base is actually a reference to the knowledge base table. The catalog is a reference to the knowledge base or the catalog table. The categories references to either KB category for the knowledge articles or SC category for the catalog items. So the way these get built is a little different in that how you build the attributes, but let's show you, I'll give you catalog items for example. If I go look at category, find the right filter, category attribute. Again, dynamic list, checkbox is equals true, and then we've got this X category attribute defined here. And notice show opens turned off. In this case, they were collapsed by default, and I opened them up. There is code in here, by the way, as if I were to pass in a filter through the parameter to set the set the category to a certain category on display. It will reveal that category if it's being set to a value. But so X category, let me show you what this is. So if I go to the same catalog item record, you'll see X category of my attributes. Now the way this is built is a little differently in that it's not just a single mapping to like a status value like we had before, but instead here we're basically building an object that's coming back for each of these records that's in the list. And the object really needs two things. It needs this value attribute and it needs this label attribute. So the value attribute's what, when I go to select it, it's going to actually use the value attribute as the filter for filtering the list and showing just records that match, say, this category. The label's then going to be used for the display value of that particular category to the user. So this is kind of how we handle those reference kind of attributes and kind of their structured data. So let me add a new, let's go add a new filter just to kind of show you this kind of from a creation perspective. So I'm going to go to, we'll just start with our knowledge base attribute, and I'm going to create a new one here for knowledge management called author. We'll say filter by author, and then we'll limit the results to a author. And basically all this I'm going to leave the same, and then I'm going to change my attribute here to author, and I'll move this down the list of filters just kind of down the line. We'll go add new. And note, this is my author attribute. If I go back to my card objects for knowledge articles, you will see I do have a mapping already set up for author. So the author field that comes from the knowledge articles is being mapped to an attribute called author. So now I can filter off of that. So now that I've done that, if I do a refresh of this same exact search, what I'm expecting to see is a new filter in my list, filter by author. And basically it's going to take my content that I've got searched here, show me my different values that are represented in my list. If there are more than 5, you'll see a kind of a show more option to kind of show me the rest of them. And then this gives me the option then to show which ones are authored by, say, David Liu, which ones are authored by the system administrator, and kind of pick and choose and filter those options by that data value. So that kind of covers dynamic filters. That's kind of how they are. In the sense, you can define a new filter on the card object records, use the data to build that list, and I hope this is a helpful feature. Add it to our application.